Mila and I are here. We are going to draw today. You guys are going to draw too. We are here with our garden. First I want to go over the answers to the questions from last class.
Mama.
Yes?
Miss.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm going to use this. So number 1 was about the female part of the flower, and some of you had some really great answers. And there's actually kind of 2 answers for that that were possible. So you could have said the pistil or the carpel. So in a minute we'll draw all of these together, but the female part and the male part, they're composed of lots of different pieces. So with here's my drawing of the flower, which we're going to recreate in a second together. But here is the stigma, right? Then here we have the ovary that has ovules inside, and the style, which is this long part that connects the stigma down into the, sometimes they call it the receptacle, and it includes the ovary inside. So the stigma, the style, and the ovary together can be called the pistil or the carpel. And sometimes the reason that it's 2 options is because a pistil could be composed of several carpels, like all together, or there might just be 1 carpel. So the next question was, why is the stigma sticky? So on plants, a lot of times this part that sticks out at the top, you'll see this kind of little bulbous thing, and it can be sticky, or sometimes it's hairy. And the little hairs or the sticky texture are there to capture pollen. A lot of you guys got that perfectly correct. You said to catch the pollen. And then the next question was about the male part of the flower. So you often you'll see this section sticking up in the middle of the flower, and then you see little parts coming out around it. You might have seen that before. So the little parts that stick up, and on top they have a little kind of oblate spheroid shape. Sometimes it's got little pollen powdery flakes covering it. Okay, so that part is called the anther, and the little long stick that it's on is called the filament, and together it's the stamen. So the answer for number 3 about what is the male part of the flower, it is called the stamen. So what happens next is, if the pollen from an anther makes it to the stigma, now sometimes this happens from from the flower itself. It can self-pollinate. Some flowers can do that and some can't, or some can do both. So sometimes a flower needs cross-pollination. That means that the pollen blew in the air, in the wind, or it was carried by a pollinator. For example, a bee, a butterfly, a hummingbird, another kind of bird, other insects. So if they carry it on their feet or in some other way, some pollen, and then it gets on the stigma. Remember how the stigma is sticky? So either it gets trapped in the hairs or on the sticky stigma. Then it's like there's a little signal that knows that the pollen got on the stigma, and a pollen tube will form, okay, down into the ovary. So whenever those pollen grains land here, the pollen tube grows, and it grows down the style. The style is this tube, and it goes down into the ovary, okay? The style is this long, tall part. So once the pollen grains go down into the ovary, there are actually sperm cells inside the pollen, and those travel down and into the ovary, and they actually go to the ovules. Okay, these are eggs. There are eggs inside the ovules. So when the sperm cells go down into the ovary, fertilization occurs when one of the sperm cells fuses with an egg inside the ovules. All right, so sperm goes in here, and the egg fuses with the sperm, much like reproduction in other types of organisms. And after the fertilization happens, the ovule becomes a seed. Okay, and inside this, when the ovule becomes a seed, it has a tiny undeveloped plant called an embryo, or that is what forms in there. Okay, it's like a baby plant. And so in your question about what does the fertilized ovule become, it would be a seed. A lot of you got that. And some of you said a fruit, which is also acceptable, because after the ovules are pollinated after the ovules are fertilized and become seeds. So pollination happens when the pollen comes here. Fertilization happens when the sperm comes in here and fuses with the egg. So after that happens, the ovary gets larger and develops into a fruit. Okay, and so that's how we get a fruit, and these become the seeds, and inside them are tiny baby plants called embryos. So that was number 4, and number 5, if you remember, was to name 5 plants you saw in my garden. So most of you got all of those correct, and some of you listed more than 5, but if you remember, here's the garden. We have tomatoes, we have peppers and eggplant, which the cat likes to lay on, but the eggplant is still doing fine. We have cucumbers. We have basil. You know what I didn't show you last time? There's also mint. There's mint in here. So mentha. Sometimes it takes over the garden. Rosemary. Look, there's some more parsley coming up. All right, so if you listed, any of these, then you got credit for all of those. So thank you so much for participating in our plant quiz. And now we're going to draw your own diagram of a flower. Look guys, surprise! We have a zucchini growing. And I think I said squash, but squash and zucchini are very similar. This is a zucchini that is forming. Do you see it under the flower? Check out how big this tomato is getting. That's very exciting. And then over here, we have a lot of little tomatoes. We have some peppers. Soon we're going to be eating cayenne peppers. And here we have a baby bell pepper. So now I want you guys to get out a piece of paper or your health notebook, preferably, if you still know where that is. And we are going to draw the parts of the flower. I want you to draw this and then send me a picture for your project for today or for this week. So I'm using different colors because Mila happened to have some crayons that I'm borrowing. So if you have colors, you can do that and make it more colorful and clear. And if not, you can use a pen or a pencil. Just do your best. So I'm going to start at the top with the stigma sticking out of the flower. Okay. So I'm going to use yellow, but you can use whatever color you want. So I'm just going to kind of draw it. Actually, this is going to be sort of like a cross section in a way. I'm going to draw some of it normal, but then let's draw some like I sliced it so we can see the inside. Okay, so the stigma is at the top, and if you recall from what we just talked about, it happens, it's often sticky or has little hairs sometimes attached to it. And why was that? It's so that it can easily collect pollen. Let's say that pollen is blowing in the wind, or it's on the legs of an insect, and the insect walks here, then it's going to easily stick on. And interestingly, once the pollen gets onto the stigma, something happens, and it grows a pollen tube down the center of the stigma. Okay, so this is like we cut it open. It goes down the stigma, and the pollen actually sends a cell with sperm down in here. You never probably thought about flowers having sperm, but they do, and they have eggs and ovaries as well. So down here, I'm going to draw kind of this area. So that is the ovary, okay? This area is the ovary, and off to the side of here, there are these little things called ovules, and inside there are eggs, okay? And so let me finish my pollen tube. All right, so the pollen tube comes down in here, and there's some little connections once the sperm comes down in here, and the sperm goes in, and it fuses with the eggs inside the ovules, and that's how fertilization occurs. So let's keep drawing. We can talk a little more about that, and I'll be labeling this too as we go. So up here, this was the stigma. Okay, and this is the pollen tube. Okay, guys, and this long, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this long kind of neck of this piece that comes off of the stigma is called the style. And so down the center of the style is where the pollen tube forms. And then down here is the ovary. Okay, so there's this kind of, let's see, I'm gonna use green again. So sometimes they label this part of the receptacle. We don't really have to label that on ours today, but it's like the holder for the ovary on the inside of the flower. You might remember sometimes if you were a kid and you took apart a flower, and there's like this little section down at the bottom before you get to the little leaves, and these little leaves are actually called sepals. Okay, there's these little leaves, like not really leaves, but little green, usually pieces that kind of come off the back of the flower before you see the stem of the flower, and those are called sepals. And that is when it used to protect the bud of the flower whenever the flower was closed, like a little small green bud. And then, you know, sometimes you notice maybe in your yard you have flowers that look like that. They're not flowers yet, and then it opens up, and when it opens up that little covering, it ends up with these little pieces stuck at the back of the flower, and then it just kind of hangs out there at the back of the flower after it's done doing its job. So yeah, we can label those. So these little places that contain the egg are the ovule. Okay, that's an ovule. There's lots of ovules. Okay, different types of flowers have different amounts. So this entire section of including stigma, style, and ovary is the female part of the flower. Now, we had that on our quiz, and like I mentioned before, some people told me that it was the pistil, and some people said carpel, and that's okay. So sometimes those are interchangeable. So a flower could have, you know, just a pistil or one carpel, or a pistil with several different carpels, like a like a flower with lots of carpels in the center. So you see that too, because you know all kinds of different structures exist within different types of flowers. So next I'm going to draw the stamens. So stamen are the male parts. So the stamen kind of come out. You might see them when you look at certain flowers. So they just kind of come up off the center of the flower, and you might see on top of them this little kind of head, right? Like this. Okay, so this piece is the stamen, and that is the male part. Some of you got that on your video quiz. And it's composed of two parts. So this is the anther. Okay, and the anther is what has a bunch of pollen on top. If you ever got like certain types of lilies from the grocery store, maybe as a gift for mom for Mother's Day, or I don't know, sometimes you see flowers that have a lot of visible pollen on this section. Okay, so that's where the pollen is, and then the filament is this little kind of stick that it hangs out on. Okay, so the filament, so this is a filament. You only have to label it once, but mine might be confusing. Filament is this, right? And then the anther is up here. Okay. So, finally, I'm going to add, we need petals, right? So let's see. Just gonna kind of draw some petals. Imagine that these are in the background. These aren't as beautiful as they could be. Those are my petals. Maybe there's some more back here. Okay, so what is a petal? You guys know. Petals are the colorful, beautiful parts of flowers that most people look at when they see flowers, okay? Why are they colorful? Why do you think petals are brightly colored? a lot of times it's to draw in pollinators, right? You might see pink or purple or red. You guys might know that certain types of pollinators are attracted to specific colors. I think that bees really like yellow and other colors, and hummingbirds like red. And you might have seen hummingbird feeders have little red fake flower holes so that the hummingbirds know to come feed there. Sometimes they figure it out anyway. I hope you guys are having a great day. Draw me your flower. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but draw me your diagram of a flower and send me a photo of it by next Wednesday, okay? I'll talk to you soon. Bye.